broadcasting live from the Roanoke Valley of southwestern Virginia. Join us and see what life looks like from a medium's perspective with Reverend Tracey Lockwood, the medium's medium. We'll explore the tools of psychic development, hear stories and experiences from the other side, and learn to listen to our natural intuition. Now, our host, Reverend Tracey Lockwood.
Hello, beautiful lights, and welcome to another episode of From a Medium's Perspective. I am so excited about today's guest, but before I introduce him, I wanted to just remind you that if you're interested in a private reading or private tutoring, or if you would like to investigate some group training options and certification programs or self-study options, I do offer them, and you can find that information on my website at mediumtracylockwood.com. Well, I am particularly excited to have today's guest. Not only is he a recognized professional psychic medium, but he's also a prolific author. He has written initially 10 books on parenting, and you're probably wondering, like, what parenting? What's that got to do with this? But he's written 10 books on parenting that address autism and special needs. And one of his groundbreaking works is called Autism and the God Connection, which I think anyone would find fascinating. He has written another book called Under Siege, Under Spiritual Siege, How Ghosts, Demons Affect Us and How to Combat Them. He has written a book called Conversations with Dogs, and talks about, obviously, animal communication and how to talk back and forth with your loved pets. And also he has now written a book, The Secret Language of Spirit, Understanding Spirit Communication that happens in our everyday lives. And we'll talk a bit about that. But he also is gifted in other arenas. He's helped investigate hauntings with the Pennsylvania Paranormal Association, and he has a gift, and I smiled when I read in his bio the way that he phrased it. Today we would usually say energy healer, but he took a more humble approach and used the vernacular that you'd find in the Bible and that I was familiar with in my 20s in the Pentecostal church, of prayer and laying on of hands to help other people recover and rid themselves of pain and discomfort. And he's also been consulted on missing persons cases and unsolved homicide cases. He's been on Coast to Coast Radio, BeyondTheOrdinary.net. He's been on that popular YouTube series, Swedenborg and Life. And he's been on a web series called Shar Vision. And I'm just so happy to have him with you. I'm going to give you his name. His name is William Stillman. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Tracy. Aren't you sweet for such a terrific intro? And I'm really excited to be on your program. So thank you for having me.
Oh, just tickled. And for those of you out there that like to spy on our guest during the show, you can find him at williamstillman.com. So check him out while you're listening, or as you listen to this, or afterwards. So, well, what an interesting array of things, very multifaceted career with seeing deeply into life and beyond. I really admire your different facets that you have there. And I wanted to start off with, since the show is called From a Medium's Perspective, ask you, how has being a psychic medium changed your perspective on life?
That's an interesting question, and I'm glad you asked it, because I came to becoming a psychic medium in a rather circuitous route. And so I only actually started doing the work professionally when I was about late 30s, early 40s, and I'm about 15 years into it now. So rather late in life.
Me too.
But yeah, well, that's not a bad thing, and I think that I wasn't perhaps ready or maybe completely mature enough to accept the responsibility that comes with the work any sooner than that.
Yeah.
So I feel as though I grew into it. And I love the work very much, but I think that it compels me to become, and I'm still very much engaged in the act of becoming, but to become an improved version of my old self.
Oh, interesting.
And so,
in what way?
Yeah, well, what I do is not merely a mindset, it's a lifestyle. And it's a highly disciplined lifestyle. And, it is what works for me. It may not work for everyone, but, I take very good care of myself, body, mind, and spirit. And so I don't drink or smoke. I've never touched an illegal substance in my life. I drink only water. A little bit of orange juice with my breakfast, but then only ever water. I've been vegetarian for about 25 years now. I don't curse or swear, it's just not part of my repertoire. I'm really fastidious about physical exercise every day. I'm taking walks, I'm lifting weights, I'm doing push-ups. And I also incorporate prayer and meditation at intervals throughout each day. So that's body, mind, and spirit. And it allows me to become as pure and clear and clean a channel as absolutely possible. And I'm most grateful for it. And I see where I have been, but I also see the potential for what I have yet to do. And I love what I do very much.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's extremely important. I definitely affirm the importance of the discipline of mediumship, because there is a great deal of personal discipline, not just in setting boundaries with people and spirits, but also the self-care that you referred to. I'm also vegan, so with you on that one. And I also don't drink or smoke either. And I do think it's important. And it's not that you can't do this work otherwise, but I find that drugs, alcohol, even hypnosis can affect the clear channel that spirit wants to create or is able to create through someone, and that by simplifying our lifestyle and this sort of that general principle of noblesse oblige, if you have it, you give it, but you also shouldn't give from a depleted being. And this
absolutely
has such it's an interesting way, because we think about physical exhaustion, we feel about mental exhaustion, but we don't really think about spiritual exhaustion and being aware that we have subtle energies and that they need to be respected and taken care of so that we do have what it takes to share is really critical. I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Yes, and it even extends to what we expose ourselves to in terms of viewing material, reading material, and even the company that we keep.
Yes. Yes. I mentioned the Pentecostal church, if not in this episode, in previous ones. And I remember a particular sermon, and I'm not Christian by specificity. I have a very sort of, the more I know, the less I know kind of thing. But I remember a sermon that our pastor gave, and it was in the 1980s, and it was "Others can, you may not." And it was talking about that spiritual service. And, C.W. Ledbetter talks about that in the turn of the century, about eating a vegetarian diet and establishing a purity of personal practice so that we are the best vessels to convey those messages. It doesn't make us better than other people. It just is, sometimes it's a lot to manage, to be in the state of mind, to be able to be neutral enough to be able to receive the messages and to convey them without personal attachment. So
I agree with you. I oftentimes see my role as twofold. First, I'm something of a linguist in that I'm tasked with interpreting a foreign language and then putting that into words so I can translate it for other people that are maybe not yet as fluent as I am. And then I also see myself as an impartial third party, which is, I think, the same thing as what you were just saying, is that it gets really hard sometimes, but we do need to be emotionally detached when we're giving the information so that we don't...
In a loving way. Yeah, like lovingly detached.
No, right. In a way that's no, not in a way that's cold. I mean, it's in a way that's sensitive and empathic, but, if we weren't detached, we'd be sitting there sobbing right along with everybody else, and we wouldn't really be much use.
No.
Folks,
and also like letting go. A lot of people are aware that you probably should put your ego down when you work, but also your intellect, your preconceived ideas, so that you're not bringing your personal opinion to the table and that you're open to learning something along with your client. I just love it. And I know you do too.
Yes. It really requires a lot of finessing, and there's certainly a lot of things that I have learned over the years that I've been doing it. And things to do and things not to do. It never occurred to me early on that people would take it so seriously that they would get emotional. And then I realized very quickly I need to have a box of tissues handy.
Yes,
folks,
yes.
Because, it really is very powerful and impactful for them.
I think they can feel spirit too. Like we kind of help them make that connection, but I think they can feel the presence of the people that they're connected to, and that is a very emotional experience. I always feel very honored to have had the opportunity to meet the people or to serve as that intermediary. I like the interpreter thing. That's excellent. That's what it feels like. Yeah.
No, I agree with you. There are often times where a loved one in spirit will, like if it's a mom or a grandma, they'll want to make me a plate of cookies or something so that, my stomach's full. Or a man usually wants to shake my hand or pat my shoulder. And or if it's someone that was in the military, they'll salute, which is a show of high respect for someone to do to a civilian.
Yes, absolutely.
So, no, it's really a beautiful, beautiful process if folks are open to allowing for it to happen. And, over the years, there have been a number of occasions where I always encourage people to record their sessions where people have actually sent me little sound bites of, another voice chiming into the conversation.
Yeah, that has not happened too often with me, but it has happened. And
I just had it just happen within the past few months. A gal sent me a little clip, and I was actually talking about her spirit guide. And when I see a spirit guide, I see the guide standing dead center directly behind someone. And I said, your guide is stepping forward at this time to put his hand on your shoulder to steady you and to tell you to focus on your work and your family. And in that moment on the playback, there is something that sounds like a cross between a sigh and some sort of music. It's the strangest thing, and I've never heard anything quite like it.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, the dimension of, when we do step out of body and we get into that realm, colors do have sound, and it's like a multi-dimensional thing that occurs there. I had a similar one also with guides. Oddly enough, I thought that's cool that you brought that up as an example. And I think I had just said that her guides were standing around wanting to connect with her because I could see them standing close to her, but I sensed she hadn't already made the introduction or whatever. And she said that on her tape, there are voices in the background. She never did send me the clip, but I did. I thought that's so interesting. So cool, that as a paranormal investigator, I'm assuming that you went on as a medium with them, but also the recording equipment. I don't know. What did you do? What do you do with the Pennsylvania Paranormal?
Yeah, no, it's just me and no equipment of any kind, and it really
you are
is
the equipment.
Yeah, I'm the tuning fork.
Yes.
Yeah, no. When I do that, and I'm trying to get away from doing that as much as I had been.
Yeah.
But and there's a reason for that. But when I do that, it's because the headquarters has received a request for investigation in my locality. And so I will, talk with folks and counsel folks. But I got to tell you, Tracy, as you probably already know, when people are under spiritual siege and there's some really, nasty, awful stuff going on in their household, in every instance, it's been also uncovered that there is abuse and addiction in the household as well.
Yeah, there's a portal, there's a window, there's something, a boundary that's been dropped that makes space.
Yeah. Well, it's like a dog that chases its tail. I mean, one thing feeds the other.
Yes.
And folks, if they're not willing to make some significant alterations to their lifestyle, there's not a lot I can do for them.
Right.
Because it's
yeah. Go ahead.
It's their house, not mine, and they live there and I don't. And so, they have to be all in. And if they're not going to commit, then, there's not a lot I can do for them. But I have to be cautious about that because, I need to, as we've been talking about, preserve and protect myself so that I can continue to be of service.
Yes, yes. And, vibrationally, we all know opposites attract. So if somebody does have negativity around them, it could be that because they're the contrast, they're being the light, but also like attracts like, and especially in what you're talking about, if somebody has a vibration that is lower, then that's a harmonic resonance with those. Yeah. So that's, definitely. I wanted to have you tell us a little bit about sort of how your path led you to where you are right now and maybe where you'd like to see it heading more.
Yeah. Well,
so
it's an interesting...
Yeah.
It's an interesting segue, given the topic that we were just discussing, because I started out life as, an intensely, painfully, exquisitely sensitive little boy who would get very emotional just by listening to certain songs.
Yeah.
And had some, very unusual things happen around me. Some of it, was intriguing and some of it wasn't very nice. And as I grew and mature, as you're a pre-adolescent boy and you're very sensitive and gentle and, other kids are becoming a little bit more worldly and sophisticated, your gentleness doesn't go over so well, especially with other little boys. And for many years of my life, about 7 to 8 years of my life, on virtually a daily basis, I was verbally abused and physically harassed, and my speech and body language were openly mocked and mimicked in front of adults, bus drivers and cafeteria staff and teachers who really did little to nothing to prevent it from happening. And so the sensitivity that I possessed really became blocked up and suppressed. And I didn't have a support system in place. I didn't have anyone that could console me. And I didn't, I wasn't as invested in my faith as I should have been to have relied on my faith. And so what I began doing was projecting back what other people were reflecting upon me as a defense mechanism. And it's not an excuse, but it's an explanation. And I became, I think, not a very nice person. And I became very bitter and cynical and sarcastic and very isolative. And I descended into a really dark period of time in my life where I was clearly clinically depressed. I developed post-traumatic stress disorder. Quite clearly, I see that in hindsight now. Came very close to committing suicide as a teenager. But this was also the time when I was extremely vulnerable to being taken advantage of spiritually, and that's precisely what happened. There was a dark energy that would show up in my bedroom doorway every evening as I was trying to fall asleep. I could hear its footsteps, and I could see a tall silhouette of a man, about 6.5 feet tall, with a floor-length black coat and a black broad-brimmed hat. And he was there with the intention of seducing me into recruitment. Yeah. And the curious thing about all of that is that, and I need to stress this for our listeners, it was not frightening, because that would have undermined his purpose and intent in being there. It was unnerving and it was unpleasant, but I was not, frozen with terror.
No, it was there, which path will you choose?
Now, in researching last year's book that you mentioned at the top of the hour about being under spiritual siege, I have come to realize and was rather surprised to find that thousands of other people have seen the exact same entity.
Yes, absolutely.
And this is, we're talking 45 years ago.
Yep. I've just 2 weeks ago, or maybe 3, had someone mention that particular occurrence. Absolutely.
And so, I got to a point when I was in my mid to late 30s where I really put my foot down, and I made a deliberate commitment and said to myself, I am tired of this. I'm tired of behaving in a cynical way. I'm tired of portraying myself this way. And I also want to communicate to our listeners, not one of us is mandated or locked into portraying ourselves in the way that others have always seen us. You can transform yourself at any given moment. And that's exactly what I decided to do. And I reclaimed my relationship with God, and I made a commitment to my personal spirituality.
Yes.
And I read everything I could get my hands on. I read about 100 books in a year. And I got to tell you, it just shot through the roof. And I made up for decades in about 3 months.
Wonderful.
I was being mentored every night in dreams. I was being given challenges. I was being given spiritual problems to solve in dreams. I was being shown aspects of human nature that I needed to be aware of as I moved forward. And that just totally opened up my crown chakra, and just light started shooting in and out. And that's when I began doing the spiritual work.
Oh, I just have the biggest smile. So, yeah, I was just thinking about interjecting that exercise earlier than planned. Shall we? And then go on to part 2 of your story,
Sure
part
thing.
3?
Well,
yeah, let's do that.
Well, we were before the show, we were chatting, and we were talking about, with the holidays coming up, not every family gathering is like, Leave It to Beaver. And, sometimes we see friends of the family, or even certain family members that we might think of as toxic people, or people that tend to exhaust or sap our energy. And I am asked often by people, what can I do about this? How do I is there something I can do when I know I'm going to be in a situation with someone that is just draining me of energy, or someone who is very narcissistic or egotistical, and I come away from them just feeling completely exhausted? And it's interesting because before we came on the air, I actually said a little blessing, and I threw a veil of protection from me to you, just to ensure that we were insulated and protected, and nothing would interfere with our time together. And
Beautiful.
So what I always recommend that people do is, before going into a situation where you know you're going to encounter folks that are maybe carrying a lot of baggage, or that maybe, you know, are struggling with issues of mental wellness, or they have addictions, and they're just maybe not pleasant people to be around, throw a veil over yourself. Mentally visualize a shield of protection that envelops you from head to toe. And if it's helpful, you can envision it as being fashioned out of just a luminous golden light, and it encapsulates you from head to toe, and it is there to protect you and to also defend you, and it will repel and deflect anything that is not for the greater good of the highest order. Give that a try, folks, and see if that doesn't make a difference. So you might see that your interactions with that negative energy or that negative person might be a little bit more pleasant, or you might see that person avoiding you altogether. It could be a really interesting little exercise.
That's a really great exercise. It's, you know, first of all, shifting your energy focus so that you realize that you are in control of your own energy. Yes. And I like it because it divides, you know, a lot of our listeners, like you and me, are highly empathic. So we pick up the emotions or thoughts or feelings of other people, and being able to separate what is theirs from what is ours is really important. And that's such a beautiful way to do that. I really like that.
And so, you know, you're not obligated to be party to anyone else's toxicity. And this is not about setting yourself up to be a victim. This is really about being empowered enough to really grab the bull by the horns and take a proactive stance.
Yeah. And I also like it that it isn't aggressive, because a lot of times people kind of feel like they have to muster up a lot of energy to fight against the darkness or something like that. But anytime you push against something, sort of like if you have your hand on the wall and you push, guess where your hand is? It's touching the wall. You're attached to it. So I like that sort of like pluffing of the energy and throwing that veil over so that it creates a shield without it being like, you're bad and I don't like you and I'm going to push on you, which of course keeps focus on the negative rather than
it's not like that at all. And it's also not about, it's not about behaving any differently than you ordinarily would. You're still going to be yourself. It's just knowing that you're entering into a situation with a little bit of a protective buffer that you have instigated and set up around yourself.
Safety zone. I like that. That's wonderful. So I just wanted to shift the energy off the because anyway, whatever. So now I wanted you, if you will, to continue. So you went through these years of challenge and that decision-making encounter, and you chose clearly the light, and you dedicated yourself to study and to building yourself. Take it from that point. Take that forward for us to today, and then also where you'd like to take it too.
Yeah. Well, so as I was saying, I really experienced this growth spurt that was really quite extraordinary. And one of the things that happened during that period was I decided to christen with a name this protective presence that I had always sensed around me for the longest time. You know, I've had a pretty irrational and ridiculous life in terms of good luck and good fortune and protection. And I'm a 55-year-old man that's never been seriously ill. I've never had a broken bone or been hospitalized or had an operation for any reason. I've never been in a serious accident of any kind. I've always had good health. I've always had money when I've needed it. And I think that's very unusual. And I don't take that lightly, and I accept the responsibility that comes with that. And I gave a name to that presence that I now think of as my primary spirit guide. And within a week, that name was validated 3 days in a row. And the third day was the most powerful, the most extraordinary. And things have just kept moving forward from there. I've learned the language of spirit, which is what the new book is all about, Secret Language of Spirit.
Can't wait to talk about that too. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I've learned how, spirit will play off of my personal physiology, my senses, my emotions, and my memories in order to communicate. So I'm sure you've talked with your listeners before about the 5 clairs.
Yes.
And how those correspond with our senses. And that's going to be unique and individual, as each individual is unique. So my personal intuition, my personal lexicon of signs and symbols is probably not going to be the same as everybody else listening, because it's mine.
Right, as it should be. Yes.
Yeah, and so what I've been doing has been private consultations with folks. Sometimes I get requests to meet with people's dogs and do that.
Yes.
But what I love most of all, Tracy, and what I am most passionate about is doing group events. And I've been really blessed and privileged to have held events in theaters and performing arts centers where I'm working with an audience. Because that is what is most fascinating to me. And there's never a dull moment. And I just sort of love the energy of working with an audience and working with a group. And, we have a lot of laughs and we cry, and some just really sometimes amazing, miraculous things occur.
Oh, that's really beautiful. Do you have, it sounds like you'd like to continue in that realm, and you're already just an incredibly prolific author. Anything else in your future that you want to share that you're thinking of expanding into?
Well, I do love teaching, and I think that's one of my stations in life, is to be a teacher or a communicator. So I do enjoy that. And there is some teaching that I think is inherent in working with an audience as well. And, I end up learning new things all the time myself.
Oh, yes.
So I love what I do so much because it is fascinating and intriguing to me personally also.
Yes.
And it's never dull, as I'm sure you can attest.
Never dull. No, it is just an amazing world. And I love, too, the diversity within the discipline, too. Each person has their forte there.
Yes.
I want to ask you, I'm so curious about each of the books you've written, actually, but I wanted to maybe focus on your most recent book that you wrote. It's The Secret Language of Spirit, Understanding Communication in Our Everyday Lives. Yes?
Yes. Yeah, I'm really very pleased with this book because I think it's one of the best things I've ever done.
Wow.
And I got to tell you, it came together very, very quickly over the summer. I sold it immediately to a publisher, and they said, we want to bring it out in the fall. So it happened very, very quickly.
Fantastic.
But I was inspired to write this book after I had gone to the movies. And I saw a movie called Arrival with Amy Adams, and she's a college professor who is also a linguist who specializes in translating obscure languages. And she gets tapped by the Army to work with them to decode the communication of extraterrestrials that have a craft in, I think it is in Washington State. And at the same time, simultaneously, there were other crafts in other parts of the world. So everybody all over the world was kind of scrambling to decode the communications. And the communications that were being expressed by the extraterrestrials were very symbolic, and they came out in patterns that almost looked like ink blots, like a Rorschach test.
Oh.
And I thought to myself, you know, she's doing something almost identical to what I do.
Yes.
You know, and my job and your job is to translate a foreign language for people who are, you know, not as adept or as fluent in that language as we are.
Oh, what a
brilliant
connection.
Yeah, and so I came home and I thought, you know what? I'm going to start to put down in writing everything I've learned and all the ways in which I know that Spirit has communicated with me and through me for the layperson. Because when I was going through that process of emerging and evolving and kind of reclaiming my personal gifts, I could not find a single person who would help me figure it out.
Uh-huh.
So I am. Yeah, I didn't know you at the time, or I would have called you.
Oh, no, I was thinking this. No, I was thinking the same. Like, I was 50 before I figured out that what I'd been doing all my life was something. Yeah, I get you.
And so, you know, I'm completely self-taught. And I thought, you know what? I don't want anybody else to be kind of grasping at straws and struggling and going through trial and error like I did. I want to put it all out there. And I want to put it out there in a way that people can relate to and that's easy to read, and it's not, you know, hundreds of pages long. And it became this book, and it wrote itself very, very quickly. And I'm quite proud of it. So I'm hoping you'll give it a read, and I'm hoping other folks will learn more about it.
Too. Yeah, no, I love also the perspective of other teachers as they write or teach too. It's just interesting to see how Spirit is described and how our human experience or our spiritual experience in the human dimension is, or however we look at it. Yeah.
Well, it's not, you know, it's not going to align exactly. And that's why, you know,
there's not one way.
But that's why, you know, that's the beauty in being human, is that, you know, no two psychic mediums will operate exactly the same way, because the information is being filtered through this channel that is uniquely Tracey and not Bill. So it's always going to be tinged a little bit with, you know, your experiences and the way you've existed in the world. And your points of reference are going to be those that you will be familiar with to know to identify and recognize, because otherwise, you know, it would be futile. They're not going to show you things that you don't know about.
Yes, yeah. And sometimes it's in the nomenclature. I did a episode on spiritual gifts versus psychic ability because, you know, biblical terminology, and that's why I got such a charge out of the way that you phrase your healing work that you do, is because, you know, in the biblical sense, you know, we've got tongues and interpretation, which is the tongues of men and angels and the interpretation of that. And today we call that channeling, you know, and prophecy is prophecy, I guess, and dream interpretation's dream interpretation. But discerning of spirits, you know, that's mediumship, right? So it's sort of interesting how people's understanding of things shifts, and the language that we could actually be saying the same thing, but it's just intended for the particular group of people that we're supposed to reach in our work here on planet Earth here too.
Yeah. So, I'm not sure why I chose the phrase laying on of hands, and it may be because I actually do use my hands, and it's a process that takes less than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's very, very quick, but I have removed pain from people with my hands. You know, if it's a chronic pain, I can't guarantee that the relief will be permanent, but it sort of serves as a temporary anesthetic in that it can block the pain for anywhere from 24 to 72 hours. If it is a recent pain, it can be removed entirely.
That's just fantastic. And, I think that must be, I'm trying to understand more about energy healing and that type of work, because I had an incident in the Pentecostal church where I, very short story, laid hands on a lady and didn't know what I was doing, but just kind of followed the directive of whatever I was hearing and feeling. And her breast cancer was gone. And then I've been healed from a chronic neck injury. And I think it has to do with a vibrational shift. I'm trying to understand it actually from a medium's perspective, but I'm thinking it's a vibrational thing, and you bring that vibration. It's sort of like I'm sure this happens, but I've probably not mentioned it on the show before. When you do readings, do you find if you have any pain that it's gone while you're in the middle of a reading, and then, takes a while to come back, like backache or headache or whatever, then it's gone, and then it's like, oh, I'm back.
I have to say I'm just not someone who experiences pain very often, so I haven't had that experience.
That's wonderful.
But I have just recently I was working with an audience, and this gal's ex-husband and nephew, they came through together. What ends up happening sometimes is en route to an event, somebody will be in the passenger seat with me, kind of prepping me for, here's where you want to start tonight. And so that's what happened. And she followed up with me in an email to say that after there was a lot of healing that needed to happen for both of them coming through. The husband had been an abusive alcoholic, and the nephew passed from an overdose. And she just followed up with me to say, I had been in excruciating pain, and after the reading happened, it was gone. So, again, kind of similar circumstances with the raising up of the energetic vibration, and what gets communicated is extraordinary. And I think that, obviously, not everyone is intended to do the work that we do, but that doesn't mean that we don't all possess spiritual gifts and talents.
Absolutely.
And wouldn't the world be an amazing place if we were all more conscious of that and conscious of applying it to be of service to others?
I totally agree. And what I really love about you, other than your amazing energy and ability and intelligence and all those good things, is that you take the heart of what you're doing and translate that into books for people to understand more. I was just looking not only at the books that you wrote dealing with autism and the spiritual connections that are possible there, but like Under Siege, like how do you handle negative energy, conversations with dogs. We have, an intelligence with them and a communication with them too. And they are sometimes the first being that greets us when we cross over. And then this very practical book as well, The Secret Language of Spirit, Understanding Spirit Communication in Our Everyday Lives, that you've just written. It's sort of, I like it because it's demystifying the mystical and making.
Yes. And I like the way you put that, Tracy. Thank you. It is normal, not paranormal, and it is natural, not supernatural.
Yes.
So, I don't think we need to elevate it to mysticism. It is something that unfolds naturally around us on a regular, if not daily basis, and it is our birthright to access it.
Yeah. Share us a story. I know you've got a ton because you're a storyteller. So share something that pops in your mind, maybe that's occurred that just was interesting, like an interesting nugget of
Yeah, this just happened Friday night. I was doing a little event, a very intimate event with about 15 people. And, you know, I talked about how this is interesting to me personally, and I'm learning new things all the time as a result of what happens. And this was a new one on me. There was a gentleman sitting there, and right out of the gate, I started describing a father figure that ended up being his grandfather, and then the grandfather brought through his father, this gentleman's father, the man in the audience.
Yeah.
And whenever I see someone sort of hanging their head as if they're ashamed, I know they've got some, as Ricky Ricardo would say, they've got some splaining to do. And
I love that. Yes.
Yeah. So this guy's dad had been emotionally inaccessible to him growing up, didn't treat him very well, had some addiction issues with alcohol, and was coming through to apologize. And then before he signed off, he sent me the scent of roses, and he said that he wanted to be affiliated in memory with the scent of roses. And I just thought that was so strange, because in all the years I've been doing this, I have only ever had spirit associate a floral scent, or specifically the scent of roses, with females. And so, you know, being that impartial third party, I got to say what I see. I can't, you know, censor it. I got to come out with it. So I said,
get no more, no less. That's right.
Yeah, it's going to be what it's going to be, and I got to say it. And so I said to this fella, you know, this is very unusual, but he wants the scent of roses to be associated with him as his calling card to you. So if you would smell roses, you would know that he is near to you. And I said, but I got to tell you, this is the first time in, 14 years that I've ever had a male presence communicate that. And he said, well, I have to explain why that is. He says, later in life, my dad was transgender.
So it was a feminine energy that was.
It was the feminine. Yeah, it was the feminine aspect of his personhood. Maybe that was the authentic aspect of his personhood.
Yes.
And that he had been, running from it his entire life, and hence the alcoholism. But I just thought that was so interesting and so fascinating.
Yeah, I do too. The only time I've smelled I've seen roses one time around clients, and it's like you said, the very specific language of spirit. And I couldn't get away from like all these roses that I saw around. And it was a newer reader at the time, so I was kind of ignoring it, trying to process it while I looked at it before I said something. And I said, I'm seeing all these roses around you. And she goes, oh yes, our family name is Rose. Mm-hmm. And so in that case, that's what that was. And I've smelled them with Mother Mary and Saint Therese.
Yes.
Also.
Yes, it's most often associated with the Blessed Mother, but I have had a number of female energies over the years associate that scent, or like the scent of lilacs, with them. And I've also seen many loved ones in spirit gift bouquets of roses to people, often to acknowledge a birthday, or a significant achievement, or an accomplishment, or oftentimes it's also used as an act of forgiveness.
Yes. My grandfather gave me green roses one time from another medium, and I wasn't very gracious receiving them because we had sort of a falling out before his passing. And I'm just thinking how evidential that was. People talk a lot about creating evidence that we are actually speaking with another spirit, and what a beautiful evidence of your sitter's or the recipient's father being present, and the fact that his energy did align much more with the feminine energy. I just find that absolutely beautiful.
You know, oftentimes too, the color of the roses will be significant for the receiver as well.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I know when I saw them around this person, they were red roses. When my grandfather came through, it was green. And I think it had to do with healing the relationship too, like him making an effort to heal the breach. Which,
well, one of the things that comes up often with respect to healing relationships is that a loved one in spirit will communicate their expression of admiration or gratitude to the individual for breaking a pattern or breaking a cycle in the family. And they always express the importance of doing that while we are here in human form, as opposed to comprehending it and understanding it once we get to where we're going.
Yes, it really
in other words,
is important. The physical is so important. Yes.
Yeah, it makes such a bigger difference to figure that out while we're here and then take corrective action.
Yes, yes. And I think that's part of the reason that we choose a physical form to work out some of those things, because there isn't really any resistance when we're out of body. It's, you know, very free will, like unadulterated free will, at least at the highest levels there. And yeah, wow, that's so interesting.
But if you haven't been a very nice person and you get to the heavenly realm, you're going to have to confront the ways in which you have hurt other people. And the communication is, it's better to enter with a clean slate. If you can figure out how to fix it and make it right while you're here, or if you can break a cycle of addiction or mental illness in your family, then you score big points while you're here.
Yes, I agree with that, because in our life review, some people think of it in terms of like the judgment, but
it's not intended to be punitive at all.
It's a
learning time
shift. Yes. In our life review, being able to experience our words and actions as if we were the other person. Yeah, if you can heal that stuff first, absolutely. I'm working I've been working, and my mom has been working, and we've just created such a beautiful relationship between the two of us that I wouldn't even have imagined possible. And I feel it's at a soul level, like a healing level. It's really, and don't you think with grief it helps to not have any regrets,
Yeah, and I also think, and as I talk about in the secret language of spirit, a lot of times people overinflate or exaggerate the perspective of the loved one who's passed on, such that they feel that the person might be unhappy with them, or might be upset with their memorial service and things like that. And they've released all of that.
Yes. Oh my goodness, William. We are at the end of our show. He can be found at williamstillman.com. Thank you so much.
It was a great pleasure. The hour zipped by.
Yes, it did. And listeners, please remember that it's never inappropriate to be kind, and without integrity, you have nothing.